So Mark Zuckerberg is thinking he's going to bring VR to another billion people just like Facebook? Based on the hardware release yesterday, I actually kind of doubt that. No, this is not directly related to Apple, but Tim Cook made some comments recently about AR and VR, and you may notice him and I actually kind of think in a very similar fashion. Whereas I think people like Mark Zuckerberg, who have started giant social networking companies like Facebook, that's actually kind of the biggest, perhaps received a tad more luck than actual knowledge about what people want. There's no denying that VR is cool. It's a really interesting technology that's up and coming, but it definitely has a lot of challenges, and I'm not entirely sure that they are fixable. So there's kind of been two different formats of VR headset for the past couple of years. There's been the advanced kind that usually range between $600 and $800, where you hook it up to a very powerful gaming PC, you have motion controllers look around the room, and then you have little mandibles that can help you interact with whatever game or VR app you may be experiencing. Mind you, these computers you have to hook them up to are quite expensive, and they need to have quite a lot of power. But the other alternative is something that is powered by something a lot more smaller, typically our smartphone. You snap it into some form of VR headset, you open the apps on the smartphone itself. That way, you're not tethered by cables, and some headsets come with the actual controller mandible device itself, but they don't track where you are in actual space that well because there's no motion trackers to track where your controller is. And you've seen Oculus made these, you've seen them partner with Samsung and make these, you've seen Google make this with Google Daydream. So we've got kind of our polar opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to VR. Now, yesterday, Facebook changed that by introducing Oculus Go, which is a wireless headset that does not need a smartphone to be snapped into it, but it does have hardware components that allow it to run VR apps, and it's got what Oculus is calling some of the best lenses they've ever used. It works with glasses, and of course it is wireless. You don't have to pair this to a computer, you don't need to snap your phone in there. It has a controller, apparently has very comfortable bands on it, which is of course nice. I'd hope so, Facebook. But it doesn't look that different from the original Oculus Rift. But the thing that's supposed to be more appealing about it is that it starts at a fairly nifty $200, and the official price of the Oculus Rift, the one you do pair to a PC, has been officially lowered to $400. It's no longer a sale, it's just officially that cheap. Which, it's been out for a while, so it makes sense that prices would go down. But I still think despite prices getting lower and wireless becoming more and more doable with VR, it's still not conquering kind of the inherent problem VR has, which is actually two things. For one, contact, and two, motion. The reason why these two problems are fairly unconquerable is the more you try to fix them, the more complicated VR gets for most consumers, and it makes it harder to buy for everyday people. And a lot of people who have been using VR for years now are starting to admit that perhaps VR is not meant to be brought into everyone's living room or everyone's office, but maybe something you go to, like a theme park. So first off, kind of my issue with Oculus Go, while it is cool and I'm very impressed that they're able to store all of the components and all of the lenses capable for displaying a VR experience within a headset itself, no computer or smartphone required, that doesn't really help the experience that much, because typically when you're wearing a VR headset, you're not using your phone at the same time, obviously, because your vision is concealed, you're interacting with something. So I don't think the big problem with mobile VR headsets was that they took up the use of your phone, and now you didn't have your phone while you were using VR. You can't do much else while using VR. It's kind of a soul-grabbing experience. You can only do VR when you're experiencing it. You can't be multitasking while doing VR. So having my phone now be available separate from the VR headset doesn't really enhance the experience that much. And by the looks of this particular headset, it seems that it's got processors and graphic performance of pretty much a smartphone. It's probably a tad more optimized, and I bet it looks a lot better because it's not lenses magnifying on an iPhone display or a Galaxy display. It is now actual displays that are built for specifically VR, so it probably looks and operates a tad better, but it doesn't change the experience that the components you're working with are still just about as powerful as a smartphone. So what I'm trying to say is buying a separate headset that you plug your phone into definitely won't be as good as Oculus Go, but for the most part, you're going to be getting the same experience out of it. And the difference is this is going to cost twice the price of that, so that you can have an independent VR headset. But before I get too sidetracked, those two problems I was talking about were contact and motion. So contact meaning when you physically interact with something in the virtual reality world. It means if you go up to a wall, you can walk through that wall because, as we know, it's virtual reality. That wall is not really there. Or if you're playing a sword game and you want two swords to parry with each other, that sword is not going to stop you from moving your arm. You can go right through that enemy sword because it's not real and there's not hardware or technology that can prevent your arm from moving, so it actually feels like you're making contact with an object. So whether you be grabbing something, pushing something, fighting something, there's no physical contact, and that is a problem with VR that some companies are trying to solve, whether it be with inflatable gloves or bodysuits, exosuits you wear while wearing VR. But like I said, the more you try to fix that problem, the more complicated it gets for the consumer. No one wants to have to put on an entire suit to use VR. No one wants to have to also wear gloves along with their mandibles because, first of all, it costs more money and it's more complicated to set up. If VR wasn't complicated enough already. And that second problem is still movement. When you're in VR, you are blindfolded. You cannot actually see where you are going, which means that while this is called Oculus Go, it's probably not going to tell you to go outside wearing this or go in the street, go somewhere in public and wear that, or if you do, don't walk while wearing it because there are hazardous things outside. You could walk into traffic, there could be people who vandalize you, take your stuff while you're not looking. So even though this thing is wireless, even though it has that subtext Go, it's not like you're able to really leave the comfort of your bedroom or living room, because by the look of the Oculus Go, there's not really a camera on the front to tell you that you're close to something. So whether they rely on software to detect if you're near something and says, hey, don't run into this object, I don't know. The technical specifications were very broad and not clear based on the keynote Mark Zuckerberg held. He didn't talk much about what the resolution of these displays are, what the refresh rate is. I'm assuming it's a standard Quad HD display with a refresh rate of 90 hertz or something like that. But the apps you're capable of running on it are probably not going to be that different from the apps that are already available on Samsung VR, which I've used myself and find kind of impressive, but I'm really glad that the price has dropped to $200 because if you really want to get into VR, you might have to understand that VR apps are not cheap. All of the apps I tried on my Samsung VR were incredibly expensive for apps because it was asking for $5 to $10 for games, and I wasn't seeing much potential with the free games as it was. The games that they let you play for free or that were on some kind of sale, it's like usually it's $4, but right now we'll let you play it for free. Those were not terribly impressive. VR makes for a great demo. When you walk into a store and they show you what it's capable of, they have all these games preloaded on it that you of course did not have to buy, and you did not have to set up the device, clicking the keyboard all over the place, having your eyes get sore, having that strap hold on to your hair. If you're like me, your hair will sweat a lot and it gets kind of stressful to be in that virtual reality world. So I'm just saying, good, I'm glad this thing is cheap because you're gonna be paying for a lot of apps for this thing to be actually useful. And even though it is wireless, and I'm glad that VR is moving in that direction because that is a big challenge they're gonna have to deal with both the HTC Vive and Oculus Rift, it still doesn't mean you can leave your bedroom or your living room because obviously you don't want to get hurt and you don't want to go into a public place just blindfolded. I got a lot of pictures of people outside wearing this thing and it's like, nah, don't do that. Especially if you're wearing headphones. Now you can't hear what's around you and you can't see what's around you. You don't want to do that in public. I don't have that much faith in human beings. It's also simply just dangerous about running into things. Even in your own home you could run into things. And I know I've seen the 360-degree treadmills that lets you run in any direction you want, but again, that makes it harder for the consumer to buy. Because that, obviously, that 360 thing that holds you by the waist is never going to be a cheap accessory, and it's complicated to set up. It's now a piece of furniture. That's not something that can be brought to the masses. That's more something that you go to at a dedicated arcade or theme park of some sort. There's been a lot of VR rides at theme parks that people have really enjoyed, but a lot of people who bought HTC Vives or Oculus Rifts for their home can't really find a big use for them. And keep in mind, those things that grab you by the waist, they also prevent you from crouching, which is a pretty common thing in game, or also jumping, also fairly common in gameplay. I'm no gamer, but I feel like running and jumping, crouching, and perhaps laying down are fairly common, and when you have a 360-degree treadmill thing like that, it's not really that doable. So you'd be spending a lot of money that would end up actually limiting you from a simple keyboard and mouse gameplay. So I do wholeheartedly agree with Tim Cook on his opinions about VR and AR. Augmented reality has a much higher potential to be the future, and the hardware for augmented reality is really not perfected yet. It's not ready to be a quality experience, but the keyword is yet. Tim Cook thinks we'll get there, and I also agree with him. I think that the tech for AR is in development, as we're seeing with Apple's AR kit, but the idea of getting it on a pair of glasses that is effective and easy to wear and comfortable is not yet available. Maybe in a couple years down the road, we'll have technology that will allow us to do that, but at the moment, if you want to do that, it's going to look like Microsoft HoloLens, and the quality of the experience is not going to be very bright either. So wouldn't recommend that, and I don't really see much of a chance of VR making it into households, into the next billion people. I see it more being something you go and visit, like a roller coaster or a theme ride. Really, really cool, and when brought to the right circumstances for the right entertainment, VR can be very useful. But this idea that it's going to be like the next smartphone, you know, that it's gonna become available and ready for everyone, I don't see it happening. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm sure you're a smart guy, but I respectfully disagree that VR is gonna be the next revolution. Of course, I'd like to know all your thoughts in the comments below, so let me know. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.